Across the United States, Americans struggle with the health and economic impact of the novel coronavirus pandemic. Amidst this, images of police brutality have come to the forefront of our attention. Tensions rise between law enforcement and those they serve, giving rise to protests which have escalated into riots. Buildings burn, and numerous people have ended up in the hospital or worse. These images dominate our minds, filling us with rage and sadness and many other emotions. Black Lives Matter and white privilege have become the topics of discussion and dissent. Here in Kings County, and specifically Lemoore, we live in a bubble. There's very little crime. We do not fall asleep to the sounds of gunshots and sirens, and police officers rarely have occasion to discharge their weapons. Today we're going to discuss what makes Lemoore different, what can be improved, and what can be done to improve community relations so that we do not end up on national headlines for all the wrong reasons. We're hosted today by Lemoore Presbyterian Church, and we're joined by Corporal Anthony Brawley. Thank you for joining us today, Anthony. If you don't mind, Pastor Dave Dack will be opening us up with a word of prayer.
Well, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Officer Brawley, for setting up this conversation. Lemoore Presbyterian Church and I personally am happy to facilitate anything that helps bring our community closer together and develop greater understanding and unity. So with that, I'd like to start us off with some prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for your faithfulness today. You have created all people, and you desire to see all of us in every community live together in unity, in justice, and in peace. So Lord, we pray that within our community, those things, unity, justice, and peace, would prevail, and that you would not only bless us with those things, but enable each of us to be agents of that unity and justice and peace. May this video and this conversation be a first step in that direction and continuing that legacy that we already enjoy of working together, living together for the benefit of all. We ask this together in Christ's name. Amen.
My name is Anthony Brawley. I work for the Lemoore Police Department. I've been currently employed for coming up on approximately 7 years now. I was promoted approximately a year and a half ago to Corporal. Prior to that, I served with the Lemoore Police Department's problem-oriented policing team in its initial phases when it was brought forth to the department. It's now gone on to several other teams that have gone out and done a bunch of great work that we're really proud of. Originally from the Valley, I live here in town now in the city of Lemoore. I don't think that's a requirement for law enforcement, but I think it definitely dictates how you treat others within the department, how you treat others out in the general community, because we all live together. It creates an atmosphere where you have a lot more to care about personally, because you're affecting that which the very area that you live in, and you want to see a reduction of crime. You want people to have nice lives. You want people to be able to have things and have homes and not have them be taken or stolen or burglarized or people be harmed within the city that you work in. I went to College of Sequoia's Police Academy in Central California. I was there, again, like I had mentioned, for approximately 6 months. And then after that, like I said, I was hired with the Lemoore Police Department. I made an application to them, was lucky enough to make it through all of those steps, and I've been here ever since. And I think we're lucky in the aspect that the culture of our department dictates that we operate like a family, but at the same time, our concerns are that trust is a pivotal thing for us. I hope it's not, but it's one of those things that is maybe lost on certain officers sometimes, that, we're simply servants to the citizens of Lemoore. I mean, ultimately, that's our boss. Yes, we all have departmental staff that are our bosses, but, all the way up to the chief and this, city council and things like that. But who's their boss? Well, it's the citizens of the city. That's who we work for. That's who we serve, and that's who we have to direct our professionalism and respect and attention to. So, for me, that's a big thing, to kind of keep that in the back of one's mind always when you're talking to people or when you're communicating with people, those are important aspects of our job. And agencies that have a hard time with that, the issue is usually some form of trust or communication with the community in which they serve. So going way back before me, I definitely can't take any credit. I was lucky that I found a department where those were core concepts that are heavily pushed within our culture. And it is fair to say that departments have a culture. Some are better than others, some are different than others. They all obviously have their own aspects, and I can only speak to mine. I can't speak ill of anybody else's because I don't work there. All I know is that in my time with this department, I have seen nothing but a consistent forward push for building trust and building bridges and communication with the people that we serve, because ultimately that's what we have to remember we're doing, is we are here to protect but also to serve everybody within the city, and they are our utmost concern and should be for everybody who's in law enforcement.
What are some of the procedures for screening officer applicants in order to prevent police brutality?
So screening procedures for law enforcement can go all the way back to the police academy. There's so many steps that occur before somebody is obviously hired by an agency and badged and given the authority that's given by law enforcement and by the state of California and our penal codes. One of the very first things that we find that occurs that many people aren't privy to or don't realize is that in the police academy setting, you have most of the teachers, most of the staff are themselves former law enforcement who have gone out and gotten additional degrees or training, and they have now become teachers, and they're essentially trying to give back from their experience as well as whatever training they've gone on their own to obtain to become those teachers. And a lot of what you'll find is that when an agency goes to those particular police academies and they're now looking for applicants, or they're looking for people who can apply while they're still within the police academy or even after, one of the things that they're looking at is behavior, demeanor, whether they received any type of formal discipline while they're within the police academy, which again, even all the way back to day one, that's something that occurs even within the police academy, because they're already trying to form these people to have a fairer mind and a fairer idea of how we distribute dealing with individuals, so that the idea of justice is to make it fair at its core, and that has to start from day one in training. So that's step one just right there, is that again, from day one, these are not just instructors, but they're essentially evaluating people's attitudes, people's demeanor, how they act towards their fellow trainees or towards their fellow basically cadets or people that are new to law enforcement. And those are things that they'll pass along 100%. They are not afraid to do that, and they serve a service in doing that by making sure that they are letting these potential agencies, whether they be large, small, or medium-sized, know, hey, this person that you're looking at may or may not have these particular issues that concern us. Maybe they shouldn't make it past the police academy setting. Maybe they should try and find another course of employment. There are many times where those people are pulled aside and flat told that, hey, we don't think that this is a career for you. You may or may not have the mindset or demeanor or attitude that a professional law enforcement agency is going to be looking for, because they will see issues down the line. So that's, again, from day one, just applying to even become a police academy cadet and to start training, which is almost a 6-month-long process. Those things are usually captured right then and there. If they're not, then there are many other steps, including obviously the interview process with whatever department they're choosing to apply with, which can be multiple interviews. So usually there's a panel interview of some sort. Usually there's a chief's interview of some sort, as well as filling out basically a stack of documents regarding your whole life, going back as far as people can remember. And then, of course, there's the official things that are done after that. A department's going to do usually a several-month-long background check into that person, checking their friends, family. If there's somebody who's older and has more history in life, they'll go so far as to check the spouses. They will go so far as to check ex-spouses. So for those that would say, oh, well, they just talk to all the good guys and all the friends who had good things to say, they will go out of their way to talk to everybody. A new thing that I found in law enforcement is they're even going so far as to talk to immediate neighbors in your neighborhood to find out what your actions are like when you're outside of work, or how things are going before you're even hired. They want to find out the true core of somebody before they decide this person should have a badge and this person should have a gun and this person should be able to essentially take somebody's freedom of movement away to place them in handcuffs and take them to jail. So again, let's say you make it past all of those multitude of steps and you do become an officer. There's still a training period now, usually a minimum of several months, 3-4 months, and larger agencies it can extend out even further, at which time the whole process of the police academy now essentially begins again. You have a multitude of evaluators, you have fellow law enforcement officers, you have your supervisors, all the way up to sometimes even lieutenants and captains who are keeping an eye on you, and furthermore evaluating day to day and official reports that are done, just to make sure that that person is growing and learning and taking on the training and the aspects that, you know, we would hope that they would pass on, which is so that they have a fair mind when they are out there on the street and trying to make these intense critical decisions.
Does the department share any training with NAS Lemoore?
Training with the base and what we have there is key. It's not something that happens, I would say, on a recurring basis all the time, but there have definitely been times when we have reached out to them and provided insight, advice, or training when they have their training times going on, and vice versa. I can speak to my time whenever I was with the problem-oriented policing team. There was a multitude of times when we reached out to NCIS, which is obviously the base's police force throughout the Navy, but they also deal in military crime in general. And we created an awesome relationship with those folks, and they were incredibly helpful to us in our investigations, and vice versa. And we're happy that we have that familiar relationship where we're able to work with each other in a professional manner. And I think that you know, all law enforcement has definitely made a push towards that. As things have gone on in the modern day, that's become a much bigger thing, a much more prominent item, is that there's not so much competition, I guess, or, you know, hey, separation, I guess. It's more, people have realized that you can deter more crime and you can definitely help each other out a lot more by having a professional relationship with those that work around you. And we're incredibly lucky that Kings County, being as kind of small and tight-knit as it is, everybody, frankly, we have very tight working relationships with, not just the individuals of the base or NCIS in particular, and that's obviously helpful to our job and to our mission.
What are the police department's rules of engagement? What are the consequences for breaking those rules?
A rule of engagement we don't really have. That's not really a thing for us the way it is in the military. Our job is obviously, when we receive a call for service, is to investigate that particular call for service to the best of our abilities, while keeping those around us and any victims and ourselves safe while we finish that particular job. As far as dealing with people, you know, there are a multitude of California penal codes that give us the rights or power to contact people, especially when we're physically called to a scene and asked to come help, which is essentially what people are doing. You know, when they call 911, that's what's happening, is they are asking us to come and do something, perform some sort of investigation or intervene somehow to assist in what very well may be the worst thing that's personally ever happened to them, or it could even be a very minor crime, but it's something that is obviously causing them enough concern that they're going out of their way to contact us and essentially bring us to the scene. And once that occurs, that starts kind of a multitude of little things that allow us to be there, stop people, talk to people, converse with them, and figure out what crime, if any, is occurring. So again, to kind of get back to the core, as far as a rule of engagement, again, that's not necessarily something that we have. It's more so directed by, hey, have we been called to this scene, or are we overtly going out and doing something proactive and stopping somebody to talk to them on the street, walking up to somebody and creating general conversation, making a traffic enforcement stop to stop and talk to somebody because they're, you know, obviously breaking some sort of a vehicle code that then allows us to do that. If there's any misconception about we can just go out and just stop people for no reason, I assure you that does not occur. If that were to occur, then that would start, you know, ramifications within the department where obviously officers would receive some level of discipline for that. And of course, there's so many things I can't what if it all day long. It would be dependent upon the action, but there are ramifications set in place and multiple levels of them, all the way up to and including termination. And then beyond that, jail or prison time if, there's some sort of a major crime that occurs due to somebody's actions while they are representing the police department and while they're representing themselves as a police officer.
This was asked by an Army veteran that it was a Lemoore High School graduate. What are the procedures for escalating force? And when is escalating force appropriate?
So as far as escalation of force, obviously our primary concern is de-escalating conflicts. When we arrive somewhere, usually what's happening is, unless it's a very minor crime or it's something that somebody's just called in to report, maybe what we call like a cold case where there's nobody's there, it's something has been stolen, taken, broken, anything along those lines, then those are easy, right? We go, we investigate, we talk to, unfortunately, the victim in the case, and we obtain their information, and we do all of the things on our back end that we to further that investigation as far as we can take it and try and determine what crime occurred and who the criminal is, if we can determine that. Obviously, sometimes we can't. But as far as crimes in progress, or where we're getting that emergent call from somebody's, essentially, like I said, saying, please help me, come here, this is what's occurring, those times are always about de-escalation and always about trying to bring things down. As people that are yelling, try and get them to stop yelling. People that are screaming and fighting each other, try and get them to stop screaming and fighting one another. And making sure that anybody that needs, whether it be emergency medical care or fire services or any other of the multitude of services that are provided, that they obtain those, and we're kind of the point of contact for trying to make the ball roll on that. So when we arrive, it's making sure people don't have injuries, making sure people aren't yelling at each other, making sure people aren't physically fighting. And obviously, if we encounter any of those things, then we have to do whatever we need to that is an appropriate level to try and bring those things down. Sometimes the easiest thing for people that are yelling is just to talk quieter than them, because now they have to be quiet kind of to hear you. And somewhat inherently people want to do that, even if they're not 100% on a level of respect for law enforcement. Generally, they may want to hear what you have to say, because you're the person that's coming in who has some authority to take them to jail or place them in handcuffs, and people don't want that to happen, so they generally want to listen to us. Again, but it's dependent completely upon the particular circumstances. If it's more severe than that, then that's where we have to meet or exceed that threat, only because our concern is everybody else's safety around us. And frankly, the safety of the individual who may be causing the issue. To take something lightly and to let it draw out, if my experience has taught me anything, it is the longer that you are dealing with somebody who has trying to commit a crime in front of you or has already committed a crime, generally what happens is more people get hurt, or they hurt themselves more, or they hurt us more. So when people look at things and they go, wow, that was incredibly aggressive, or why did they do that so fast, or why didn't they stop and think about something a little bit longer? Well, because the longer we're taking, frankly, gives that person more time to either, again, commit more crimes, hurt more individuals around them, hurt themselves, if that's the type of call we're responding to, or hurt the surrounding officers that are now responding, trying to bring that situation down to a zero. So that is why sometimes maybe that's perceived that way, that, wow, that was incredibly aggressive, or why did they do that so quickly? Well, because if the longer we take, we have those concerns that now that person is going to continue whatever actions they're doing that are frankly just going to cause more of an issue, cause more injury. And obviously our concern being life primarily, and making sure that everybody that's in that area is safe, including, like I said, maybe the person who's causing that issue. Sometimes decisiveness and doing those things quickly is what is necessary.
How would Lemoore PD respond to angry protests? What are procedures and tools that you use to de-escalate large crowds?
So with crowds and protests in general, I mean, obviously, we would always encourage somebody to do anything in a peaceful manner. If they have an opinion or a movement that they want to get out, that's 100% acceptable and encouraged. I mean, that's what America is all about, right? But when we're dealing with those individuals maybe that are in that group that are committing crimes, that's where we would then use our training to try and de-escalate those particular individual situations. And, that's something that we keep on our mind if we're responding to something like that inherently. And usually There's a little more planning that goes into those things because we understand that there are so many more people involved, and frankly, sometimes many innocents that are involved, that they're trying to do things the right way. They're trying to peacefully protest, march, speak about something, put out a message about something, whatever the case may be, and that's obviously a good thing. There is no issue there at all. So specifically to riots, if there is an issue where there are individuals that are committing crimes, then we are going to use law enforcement technique and tactic, which is generally to remove that person away from everybody else in the safest manner that we can. If that's, creating a line like some people see on TV or the movies, and then slowly moving forward and trying to envelop that subject and then be able to detain them in handcuffs and determine what crimes they've committed, to then receive enough probable cause to make an arrest, and then that person is probably going to be booked at a jail, then that's what we do. But the tactics and the way things perceive are incredibly fluid, dependent upon what we're seeing that crowd do. My personal belief is that as much as we can possibly leave people to be able to perform those actions, if they want to peacefully protest, then we try and let that happen, obviously. Lemoore had a peaceful protest on more than one occasion, and we never even responded. We were ready to, if necessary, just to make sure, of course, because again, our concern is not so much the property. Our concern is taking care of individuals and making sure that people aren't the victims of crimes that may be occurring within that group. So that's kind of a primary concern there. As far as de-escalation techniques with a crowd, generally it's now you have to get loud. So that's either using a vehicle or using the tried and true bullhorn, whatever the case may be, and communicate. That's one of the best ways to solve any problem, right? Is we have to communicate with people. So again, if there are peaceful protests that are occurring within our city, it's very likely we're not going to even respond to that, because we don't want to create any type of fear or issue with people that feel as though they're doing a legal thing in their life, and they are. So that would kind of be our stance on that. But again, if we do have to respond and we do have to try and bring down a crowd that may be stepping over and may be having individuals who are committing crimes, like I mentioned before, it's either single those individuals out to try and remove that particular problem so that the rest of the individuals can safely get across their message, or it's begin to communicate with the crowd as a whole to either disperse them so that those activities can't occur anymore. Because very often you're going to find that the individuals that are in that crowd are really only emboldened enough to commit those crimes because they're under the cover of how many people are there. And so if we need to disperse the whole crowd to try and mitigate further crimes by those individuals, that can be an incredibly effective way without us having to physically go in and lay hands on anybody or take anything further or take any further action.
In the event of a riot, where does the line get drawn between property and human life when allocating police resources in response to such an activity?
So again, I can only speak for myself and my department. For us, there's really no priority given to property ever over life. That's just, that's just a hard and fast rule at the very bottom, at the concrete level. Anything that we are going to do, our primary concern is always going to be the prioritization of resources, whether that be law enforcement personnel, their vehicles, whatever the case may be, whatever tools or tactics that we're using that particular day to save life, mitigate injuries to individuals, and that includes maybe even the people that are committing crimes or causing a problem, and ourselves. Ultimately, that's what we all do this for. Our goal is not ever to prioritize property, even all the way up to a business. Some may think, well, if it has a big dollar value, that now means it may supersede, and that's just not the case. It doesn't matter. I can't say there would ever be a line drawn where we would remove resources to go save a piece of property, again, all the way up into a building or whatever it may be, multiple buildings even, at the risk of allowing people to be injured or hurt or criminalized. So that's just one of those things that's not going to occur.
If an officer repeatedly crosses the line or egregiously crosses the line, what are some examples of things that would result in immediate termination?
Small steps are obviously documented. Big steps are going to probably initiate an internal affairs investigation, which something is, people have probably all heard of that. They understand that it is going to be members of the department and sometimes members outside that are going to investigate that particular person and determine whether they committed some sort of either a violation of their policy and procedure or California law. And there's a multitude of steps because you have city municipal codes, you have county codes and laws, and you have state law, and then you have federal law. So there are a bunch of catches in place where somebody could violate any one of those things, and it is going to initiate an investigation into them. A lot of, I don't know how prevalent it is across the U.S., but I know, especially for us, we were a big proponent and adopter of body-worn cameras years ago, when the technology was brand new, before we had major corporations behind it that were bringing forth the technology that they are today. That, we have these HD cameras now with incredible microphones, and they pick everything up, and they have these incredibly advanced recording opportunities, as well as the ability to log that in an evidentiary way where we don't frankly have access to it. Only those basically on the administrative side of the police department have access to those videos once they have been entered in as evidence. There is no manual labor to that. Once officers, what we call docking, or placing their cameras at the end of the day in their electronic docks, they can't manipulate those videos in any way, shape, or form, and that's done specifically so that the citizens and everybody that we work for understand that there's no way we can manipulate that evidence or that we can somehow change it to make us into a different light or look better. There's no editing done. There's nothing. It goes in as it is recorded with its audio, and frankly, it can't be changed unless there is something done later on the investigative side by administrative staff or a district attorney, and usually all of those things are documented extensively. So as far as, again, getting back to the basics, the small individual steps, if those occur, there's going to be a point very quickly, because there is, again, I can't speak to all agencies, but I can speak to us, where if we have somebody that is committing any type of crime under the color of authority, or even issues at home, there's going to be decisive action taken.
How much protection do officers have from the law when on patrol, and how difficult is it to hold officers accountable when they cross the line and break the law?
We only have very small leeway within the law over the general citizenry. We can stop and talk people pursuant to investigations. We can detain people pursuant to those investigations if we have the legal authorities to do so. And then we can perform, obviously people can be arrested, and we can remove them from street or home to a jail if necessary, if the investigation dictates that we have the ability to do that per law. So as far as exemptions from what we're allowed to, from what we can do over the general citizenry, there are few and far between. One of the biggest that maybe people are aware of just from TV or movie is either while we're responding to some sort of emergent call that is serious enough that it deems what we call Code 3 driving, which means that we now activated all of our lights overhead and on the vehicle, whatever we may be equipped with on that particular patrol vehicle, called Code 3 lighting. And we will activate all of that as well as a siren. We are still, even under that though, a lot of people may not realize it doesn't become the wild, wild west. We don't get to do whatever we want. Even in that, we are responsible for every single intersection, every single other person on the road, time of day, weather, schools, businesses, people on the street. Everything still comes into play. Where the exceptions lie is maybe speed, obviously. If we're in pursuit of somebody, then okay, if we're allowed to obviously break the speed limit to try and maintain that person and keep them in sight and hopefully get their vehicle stopped and be able to, at that point you're probably going to be arrested if you're running from law enforcement and in a vehicle and putting people at risk, frankly. But that's a big thing for us. A lot of people forget that, is that there are many, many times where we have to let people go because of our training, because of policy and procedure, and because of California laws that dictate If that person is doing something or a multitude of things that are just too dangerous, or we have a concern for the other members of the public that is greater than their crime, we're not just going to go crazy and follow them to the end of the earth. At some point, things will be stopped. Again, because of leadership expectations, I expect the officers that I work with to understand those things, and they're definitely trained in them, and they're updated in them continually, yearly at this point, if not more so. It's one of those things that after those events, we usually talk about them in detail as to how can we improve this for next time, how can we be safer for next time. But that's one of the big exceptions maybe that people, they see in TV or movie is, hey, well, that guy's able to do this and do that. Yes, there are certain small exemptions. Are we allowed to run stop signs during pursuit and code 3 driving? Yes. However, we are still responsible for clearing the intersection that we are effectively going through that stop sign. We can't just go through it at 120 miles an hour and hope that the oncoming traffic isn't going to strike us or that we're not going to strike them. Because if we do, it's negligence on our part, and that officer will be dealt with for that, all the way up to and including jail or prison if they harm or kill someone. So while, yes, there are certain things that we are allowed to do pursuant to that type of either driving or response to emergencies, there are still a litany of things that we have to be responsible for and concerns that we have to have. And I can tell you, for every pursuit that I've been in where it met an end with me actually being behind a vehicle and making an arrest, there was probably it was probably a 1 to 10 ratio of the other 9 being I had to stop them or call them off for fear of others in the community being harmed. And we have to just let that person go. We get whatever investigative information we can, whether that's a vehicle description or a license plate, and we try and track that vehicle down later once things have essentially, that person's out of the area and they're no longer a concern to whatever it was that made me call that pursuit off in the first place. And again, we expect our officers to be able to do that for themselves, but we also expect our supervisors, and that's one of my jobs as well, is to listen to all those facts and make sure that things are being done per policy and procedure and per California law. Outside of that, there are not a lot of exceptions. Honestly, Code 3 pursuit driving and response to emergent calls or fires or somebody who is calling us because they've been injured, in a manner which could result in their death, there's not a lot of leeway there. And I think that's maybe a common misconception. Outside of that, there are actually probably more laws that hold us to a higher standard than others when it comes to doing our job. Specifically to domestic violence calls, for instance, in the state of California, there are laws in place that state essentially that if we don't take certain actions in those investigations, not only will that potentially start an investigative review of that afterwards, but it will also potentially include jail or prison time and being fired. So when we show up and we're on those calls, and they usually very quickly are, hey, we didn't call you, it was the neighbor, or whatever the case may be, a lot of people don't realize, specific to those, but also other calls, some of those are out of our hands. Some of those we are going to take action, we are going to investigate to the best of our abilities, because it is a requirement per the state of California. They are telling us, you will go out of your way to do these particular things and to make sure that these people are taken care of and safe, or you will get fired or go to jail, or both, obviously. So there are actually far more instances that people are unaware of where that is the case, and things are more condensed on us and there's more pressure on us to do certain things than there are just, hey, you got a badge so you can do whatever you want. That's the furthest thing from the truth.
How much protection do officers have while on duty and on patrol from ramifications for their actions? How difficult is it to prosecute an officer when they decide to make themselves judge, jury, and executioner?
Like I said, I have a small worldview of other law enforcement agencies and what they do or don't do in regards to the trust or the communication within their communities. The only thing I can say is, like what's occurring here today, we were invited and we were asked to communicate and build these bridges, and I'm happy to do this. I have absolutely no problem answering questions or talking to individuals to try and get people to realize that we are not robots, and therefore we are people, and therefore we are not infallible, and mistakes are made sometimes. One of the big things that we try and do, at least within our department, is learn from those things, try to make training better, try to make the communication better, and try to have a greater understanding and build that trust with the citizens of the community. We've been incredibly lucky that this has gone on for a long time already, like I said, previous to me. And I think that's part of the reason why we're lucky to have the level of trust that we do with our citizens that allow us to do our jobs as good as we are able to. And if there's anybody that is seeing something different and their local law enforcement, the only thing I can say to do is you have to take that first proactive positive step to try and change that. Reaching out to a department, you may be surprised at what you get back. You may not, and that would be unfortunate, and I'd be sad to see that. But you have to start somewhere. I think law enforcement in general should also do the same thing. I think that's the only reason why we are where we are, is that meeting of the minds in both parties going out of their way to try and meet in the middle and create bridges and create trust. So obviously other law enforcement agencies who may not have that same level, they have to do the same thing. But all of that comes back to everybody trying to communicate. Communication is key in everything that we do. But that's a big thing that I think is maybe lost on people sometimes, is they see just the badge and a name tag and they forget, hey, there is a person in there. They are living, breathing. They do make mistakes. They are not perfect. They are not infallible. And sometimes they need to be reached out to as much as we should be doing the reaching out. And I think we're incredibly lucky that we have already created so many bridges and so much trust. And we would take every opportunity to be able to continue to do that with the citizens of Lemoore. And, I feel lucky that I'm in the position that I am to be able to work with people of this city and work with the businesses and all the citizenry that we have. And I'd like to say I appreciate the reaching out from everyone and asking for us to come and speak with everyone. It means a lot to us, and it allows us to further our departmental missions and directives of keeping the city as safe as we can, working with our leaders, working with those of business, and working with the general citizenry to obviously provide that service of keeping people feeling like they can be safe in the city that they work and live in.